So my name is Kelly Chen. I consider myself a Bay Area native. I grew up in Fremont, and I'm a genetic counselor. And technically, I guess my title is perinatal genetic counselor. So I focus on patients who are pregnant or thinking about pregnancy.
And as a genetic counselor, are there subdisciplines? Are there genetic counselors who focus on sort of the non-perinatal aspect?
Certainly. So this profession is still pretty new. I think in the beginning there weren't that many specialties. It was either pediatrics, children, and prenatal was the second, I think, as soon as pregnancy tests started. And since then, there are several different specialties. The big ones are pediatrics, prenatal, cancer has become the hot new thing. Counselors who work in the laboratory, and then specialty counselors who work in certain disciplines like cardiology or neurology or.
And what are the various backgrounds? Do all genetic counselors have the same academic training, or do they have diverse academic training?
So counselors come from a wide variety of backgrounds. They do have in common that they have to have a master's degree, and the master's degree programs require an undergraduate, usually 4-year college, and some prerequisite science courses, biology, chemistry. But other than that, you can be any major. So my classmate was a psychology major. I was a genetics major. Some people were completely not related to either specialty as long as they finished their courses.
And did you always know you wanted to be a genetic counselor, or was this a later decision? Or?
So it's very interesting. I'll tell you this story, and I like to share it when I give talks, that I didn't find out about genetic counseling until about a year after I graduated from undergrad. I went to UC Berkeley, and I knew I liked science, and I really liked genetics, so I was a genetics major. And at that time when I was going to school, the main option was to be a physician, and there wasn't that many other allied health care positions. And so when I found out that that wasn't really what was my career path, I decided to go into something totally different for a couple years. It was only after I had graduated, unpacked my boxes from college, that I picked up a brochure about genetic counseling, and that's how I found out about the profession.
Wow.
I just find it ironic just because UC Berkeley had one of the oldest genetic counseling training programs at that point. They were probably like in the first 4, so it had been going on for 20, 30 years. And when I was an undergrad, I had no exposure or knowledge about the program. And so now I feel like every time I get a chance to get back, I like to promote the profession.
Nice. And what kind of training was involved? So once you figured out that that's something you wanted, what do you do to become a genetic counselor officially?
So it's very specific. So it's usually a 2 or 3 year master's program, specifically in genetic counseling. So all the courses are geared towards the science of genetics and counseling theory. And so right now, I just did the stats, I think there are about 30 programs nationwide. So there are 3 in California and then in other states. And so you still have to apply, take standard testing like GREs, they're still around, and do some training like volunteering in healthcare settings. So I volunteered at Planned Parenthood for a year.
I see.
Doing the pregnancy tests.
Cool.
And then applied.
Are there different certifications for different states? Like if you get trained in one state, if you're in the United States, we do have an international audience, but if you're in the United States, if you get certified or get your degree, are you able to move and be a genetic counselor in any state?
That's a really good question. So the certification and the accreditation process for genetic counselors has changed. It used to be a certificate issued by a national organization, through our national organization called National Society of Genetic Counseling. And then just probably in the past 5, 6 years, many of the states pushed for licensure so that we'd have a license just like any other healthcare professional, dog groomer, hairdresser, which would open up opportunities for billing and for status and things. So this state just started issuing licenses 4 years ago.
I see. What do you think about the profession itself overall? Is it a profession that's growing in number, and how is it growing if it is?
So yeah, the profession itself definitely is growing in number. I don't have year by year, but I think in the very beginning, I think the first National Society started in the late 70s, and then there were probably 10 to 30 members maybe, and now I think we're up to past 2,000 nationwide.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
In the state, I'm organizing this conference coming up, so I just did some stats. In this state, there's probably about 400 licensed genetic counselors. So just to give a perspective of, we're still a small specialty, but definitely growing.
I guess this is sort of more of the personal side, but I mean, is Do you like being a genetic counselor? Do you feel like you're helping people? What aspect of doing this job is probably the best and most fulfilling for you?
I think it's a combination of things. Like this job, definitely, I really enjoy being a genetic counselor. It really fits my niche, that it combines my interest and my love of science and specifically genetics and genetic conditions with seeing patients, helping people in a healthcare setting. Mm-hmm. So I've been thinking about some of these answers that, the traditional role for a healthcare professional is a doctor. But doctors have a lot of stress, a lot of schooling, doing treatments and procedures, and I wasn't necessarily interested in that part. I was really more interested in communicating to patients and feeling like I could help them just using my words or just being there for them and listening to them. So I really feel that this profession has been a really good fit for me and my personality.
That's great.
Yeah.
Now you said you're a perinatal genetic counselor. So walk us through what is it like? I mean, what kind of patient comes to you, and how does the workflow process work when they seek out a genetic counselor?
Okay. So the workflow for a perinatal genetic counselor, and perinatal is actually kind of a new phrase we created at where I work. Traditionally, the word has been prenatal, so before birth, and then there's postnatal. And now that we're doing so much intervention before birth that affects after birth, we use the combination of perinatal. So most of the patients that I see are pregnant, actively pregnant, and thinking about doing some testing to check for either genetic conditions or birth defects. Sometimes we see patients before they get pregnant, but they know they want to have children and know that they might be at risk for a certain condition. So our appointments are they're like office consultations. Mm-hmm. We do a little prep work. We might contact them on the phone and get a little family history or medical history. And then our meeting with them is probably about 40 to 60 minutes long. And then afterwards, if we've ordered testing or there's other appointments to make, we'll follow up and help patients with that.
Now, I'm really curious about the testing. So do patients come to you and say, I want to know what's in my genes and what I pass on, and you guys do a test for them?
Yeah, so I think our patients are a little biased. I mean, I'm sure it seems like there are certainly patients out there who would say, or people out there who would say they don't want to know their genetic status. And those patients we never end up seeing because they would just decline an appointment with us. So those that we do see definitely are interested in some kind of genetic information, whether it's for themselves or primarily for their pregnancy or for their future child. So sometimes there's something specific in the family that we're looking for. We've had some patients just say, test me for everything, I want to know everything. And we have to explain the science and technology is not quite there yet. And so we're trying to pinpoint what can we offer you, accurate testing, specific testing, something that would be helpful too. So, yeah.
And what kind of, what do you think about the sort of new wave of personal genetics and companies that are able to get samples from individuals and look at genes for them? How does that fit in with this whole process of patients coming to you?
Right. So this whole wave of personal genomics, they've called it, it's a separate category by itself and hasn't quite crossed into the prenatal realm yet. But I mean, we certainly hear about it indirectly from our colleagues. I think just with our experience with genetic testing, a lot of genetic testing is not straightforward. Sometimes we find things and we don't know how to interpret. And so the personal genomics, I think, is an exciting new field, but also, as with any new test, comes with limitations. And those of us in the community of genetic counselors, some are very supportive of that technology. Some of us are still a little hesitant and cautious about, is it more harmful than helpful to start looking for things that may not have a complete answer to, like opening up Pandora's box kind of thing.
Can you give me any specific examples of traits like that you think are, make it more difficult to really understand? Like, is there a particular kind of dilemma, or has the patient ever come to you, or you felt you were in a situation where you were giving them information that maybe they couldn't do anything with anyhow?
Yeah, so there's actually, so I have a few examples. So one example of a test that's not straightforward that kind of gives us a little difficulty in counseling is maybe for a condition like hemochromatosis. So that's an adult type onset condition where you don't have symptoms until you reach adulthood, and it causes iron storage or overload. It can be treated fairly easily, but it does need treatment. The issue with the genetics of it is that there is a gene or two genes associated with the condition, but the gene is not the full picture. So people who have changes in the gene don't always have the condition. And so I think there's a lot of conditions like that. Alzheimer's, high cholesterol levels, where you identify a gene, but it's not 100% correlation that that gene change always causes symptoms. And then you're left with not the whole picture, and you're giving probabilities. And so then the issue becomes, is that helpful to know about a possibility that you may or may not be able to change or treat? So that's been, I think, the big dilemma, the ethical dilemma is some people would say, I'd still want to know because I want to prepare myself and try to do as much prevention as possible.
Sure.
Other people would say, well, if it's not for sure, I'm going to be left worrying, and I'd rather just take it as it comes. So I think that's the big issue with the new genetic technologies in general, whether it's looking for a trait or a specific condition, that most of the testing right now is not 100%
Right.
accurate or specific.
Sounds like a lot of what you end up doing as well is sort of education, patient education of traits and testing and how to interpret various results.
Definitely. So a lot of what I do is, I think of it as a consultation, but also just providing information. I see us as a link between physicians and patients, that traditionally doctors order tests that are fairly straightforward, like a blood count or a blood type or something like that. And they can easily tell a patient what that means in a sentence. With this genetic testing, it's much more complicated than that. It's not always a straightforward yes or no, and doctors don't have time to spend with patients explaining that. And so I see us as a bridge between that, being able to help patients decipher and interpret this information, and then also helping them make decisions based on those results. Because a lot of decisions to be made, especially in pregnancy, are not always medical decisions. They're personal decisions about what patients want to do, about information about their future offspring. So prenatal specifically is an interesting ethical realm because we're also dealing with pregnancy and termination.
What's the most difficult aspect of that, if I can ask? Is it patients actually, deciding about, continuing the pregnancy versus not? Are there significant traits that they have to deal with? I'm looking for some kind of idea when it does get gray, as far as like the difficult part of the job.
Yeah. So no, you bring up a good point. I actually hadn't thought about that before. One of the difficulties in the job in what I do with pregnancy is we're not always, we're certainly talking about genetic testing.
Sure.
Sometimes we're dealing with other kinds of tests in pregnancy, like ultrasounds. So a video picture of the baby where you see a physical problem that might be something that suggests a genetic condition like Down syndrome or something else. And seeing the physical problem doesn't guarantee what the outcome is going to be. And so that is one difficulty in prenatal, that you don't have a live person in front of you to say, oh, this person's actually fine. Maybe they have an extra finger or a toe, but they're otherwise healthy. In a pregnancy, you don't have that baby in front of you, and you can't check if there's other things going on. So I think that definitely is one difficult aspect of what I do specifically. And I would just say in general, just dealing with pregnant patients is tough. Pregnancy is a time-limited event. So I feel like of all the subspecialties in genetic counseling, prenatal is usually the most time sensitive. We're under deadlines for scheduling appointments, seeing patients, test results, and just the anxiety of the patients themselves. They also have hormone issues to deal with. It's a very emotional time. So it can be quite challenging, but it also can be quite satisfying.
Actually, you raised an interesting point that I hadn't thought of either. I mean, I guess in it's portrayed maybe in the media, or at least maybe in TV and movies to a certain extent, that this kinds of information, or even services for reproductive services. I don't know the best way to say that. For couples, is generally considered more of a middle to upper class sort of information thing. Is this what is that like in the genetic counseling world? I mean, is this something that only certain couples end up doing because they're actually don't know the best way to phrase this question, but is access to this sort of across the board for all types? What's the general demographic of people who are sort of taking part of trying to find this information? Yeah,
so at least here in California, we're in this Bay Area, I think we're in a unique bubble in terms of who comes to see us and access. The state government has ensured that all pregnant women have some kind of medical coverage during the pregnancy. So we're fortunate that we can see patients on the state insurance called Medi-Cal, and as well as private pay patients. I think many patients who come see us are very appreciative of what we can provide, but different patients need different things. So patients who are lower to middle class or of lower education status may not need all the explanation of the genetic testing, may be less likely to take the genetic testing, but could still benefit from meeting with us to explain all the options. So we see a huge spectrum of patients. But even in my employers group, we have different offices, so in different cities. So the area that I'm in is an affluent area. Private insurance patients are the ones I generally see who are educated and know the lingo of chromosomes and genes. Versus we have an office in the southern portion of the Bay Area where there are more non-English speaking patients on the state medical insurance who don't know what a chromosome is, may not be interested in further genetic testing. So that, yeah.
I could see how that would be a challenge, sort of dealing with different patients at the same time, too.
Yeah.
If it were in the same, practice or office, too.
Yeah, usually we find it helpful, like our group specifically will call patients, at least try to contact some patients ahead of time to see what their concerns are. So we call that a phone intake, and we find it really helpful, especially for the higher end, more educated patients who have a specific agenda or specific questions they want answered, to do it that way.
So I'm also curious, is there a common trait or condition that you counsel for the most? Like what are the things that you either end up counseling for, or do people come to you and ask the most? What are they most interested in?
So for my specific specialty in prenatal, by far, I think nationwide, the most common condition that we're talking about is Down syndrome. I was thinking about how I explain why. I think it's a combination of things because the condition is genetic, but it's not inherited. So it would randomly appear, and there would be no other way to tell about it other than to check for it in that pregnancy. And there's a known association with the age of the mom. As women get older, there's a higher chance of Down syndrome. The insurances actually will cover testing for Down syndrome, so that's kind of a supportive step that aids us in seeing patients. It's a common condition. I think about 1 in 800 of 1,000 births for Down syndrome occur. And it can be a long-term disability. Children with Down syndrome grow up into adults. They have intellectual disability. They can have health issues. And so it seems like there's enough interest in that we have this testing. So for my specialty, it's fairly easy. We talk primarily about that and some related conditions. Whereas in other specialties like pediatrics where I used to work, it could be a range of things, a variety of things depending on what a child comes in for us to see. Whether it's a learning problem would make us think about certain conditions versus if it was a physical birth defect, like a heart defect or a cleft lip, that would shift our gear to something else.
If you do end up testing for something like Down syndrome, does that mean you're taking a genetic sample from the developing embryo?
So that is still the gold standard. Yes, to test for Down syndrome accurately is still an invasive test where you're taking tissue indirectly from the baby. So either an amniocentesis or chorionic villi sampling, which have been, I think, available for a generation now. So those are still kind of the gold standard way to test for Down syndrome and other chromosome problems because we have tissue from that baby. But more and more over the years, we have a lot more alternate tests that don't require invasiveness into the pregnancy, primarily blood tests and ultrasounds that can check markers for Down syndrome, versus the amnio and the CVS are looking at the chromosomes and looking at the cause of Down syndrome. So now we have a combination of both, and I think especially now patients are faced with so many choices, it really can help them to meet with us to sort out all the different options, the benefits, the risks, numbers, detection rates, things like that.
Wow. What's the most difficult trait you've had to counsel? Is it Down syndrome, or is there another more difficult situation or trait that you've had to, let's say, counsel a family on or a couple?
So Down syndrome is always, it's always a difficult trait. Like, I was thinking about this because I have experience both in prenatal and in pediatrics. I mean, one of my most memorable patient cases had not to do with a prenatal case, but a pediatric case where we were seeing a child, and part of the list of conditions we were thinking about was Tay-Sachs disease. So that one is also a known single gene recessive condition that is common in people of Jewish background. So when we were thinking about that disease, that usually means that the child is coming in with delays and maybe normal development then loss of delays. So it's not like it's a surprise to the family. We would talk to them about, this is a possibility, we're going to be ordering tests for this condition. But it's always hard to have to call or contact a family and tell them this is a condition. So I think any kind of test result that confirms a condition that it has high risk for complications or early death, that's never easy to convey.
You do pedigrees, don't you?
Yes, we do. We always do pedigrees. It's kind of our shorthand for gathering medical information.
Are you fast? Are you good? How fast can you draw a pedigree?
I'm pretty, my colleagues would say I'm too fast at a lot of things, so I'm pretty fast at drawing a pedigree. We have colleagues that don't have the template, they used to have a template that you could trace a pedigree. And so I had colleagues who could whip out that template and do the rotation and things. But most of us can draw freehand pretty well. But now there are programs that also draw pedigrees. Because mine are fairly basic. I could take maybe 3 generations of pedigrees. So patients, their children, and their parents. Some pedigrees, like for cancer, where you're really trying to pinpoint all the individuals with cancer, those pedigrees could get huge. And then I think the counselors definitely need help with a program that can kind of line things up and sort things out.
So do families really have all this information? Like, are you able to build like these massive pedigrees, or do you end up building these sort of more like just maybe 2 or 3 generation pedigrees?
So families vary in how much information they can give us for pedigrees. I see a lot of patients also, I should mention, that come from other countries, specifically Asia, where not much is known about family members. People don't talk about conditions in the family. So and people don't have that many children. So the pedigrees can be very sparse. So just like a circle and a square and circle and a square, and that's it. And then all the way to families who have their whole genealogy trees mapped out with the aid of all these online tools. So they come in with their pedigrees already drawn. So it's really a fun part of our job, but it's also efficient to draw this out instead of trying to describe all these people.
Well, I have a really interesting question to ask for all of our students who might be struggling with pedigrees out there. How do you, as an actual genetic counselor, let's say you're studying a trait, how do you distinguish when you're looking at traits, a recessive or dominant trait, and put it in context of what you think is going on?
So trying to figure out a trait, whether it's dominant, recessive, or even X-linked, those are the top 3 modes of inheritance that we're looking at. We actually have a term called pedigree analysis. And you know, it's a subjective thing, but it really is looking at the pedigree and going through kind of all the rules of what dominant inheritance looks like, what recessive inheritance looks like. So if you see a trait that happens in a grandparent, a parent, and a child, then that's much more likely to be a dominant trait. If you see a condition where multiple brothers and sisters are related, and by chance maybe their parents are related to each other, and no one else in the family has a trait, then that's more likely or suggestive of something recessive. And then if you see only boys affected through moms, that could be more X-linked. So the pedigree really does help us try to figure out modes of inheritance.
That's really cool. What about, I'm super curious, because in our class we actually learn about sort of the possibility of recessive and dominant in an autosomal context and an X-linked context. And we also briefly go over a maternal inheritance, which would be any conditions that affect mitochondria, presumably. Are there any conditions or traits that you ever have to deal with that fit that model at all?
So I'm very fortunate that I don't interact, or I don't have to deal so much with maternal inheritance like mitochondrial inheritance, because it can be, that's still a very tricky type of inheritance, up along with imprinting effects. So there are some complicated modes of inheritance that, I mean, you could see in a prenatal pedigree, but it would be hard to be borne out unless someone had a name of a known mitochondrial condition. But my colleagues in pediatrics certainly are looking at children where there might be something mitochondrial going on. It gives a specific phenotype or picture where children have certain metabolic lab results, they have learning delays or physical problems. So oftentimes they are telling families there's a diagnosis of something mitochondrial and trying to explain inheritance patterns, which that is really tough because there's a much higher recurrence risk. in that than the traditional modes of inheritance.
Have you ever had to look at a trait, or I don't know, I'm just curious, have you ever looked at a trait where no one knows what the inheritance pattern is yet? Like, have you ever discovered a new inheritance pattern? Like, does that happen as a genetic counselor? Are you ever looking at traits that no one's ever described before?
So that's kind of two separate questions. So that looking at a pedigree, sometimes we don't know the inheritance, like it doesn't fit a traditional dominant or doesn't fit a traditional recessive. So that's kind of the fun part of our job, where it's a rare occurrence of something happening. So it's not, I don't think we've discovered a new inheritance, but we've discovered new instances of it, rare instances of things that can happen with traditional inheritance patterns. So that's one way, like something happens on top of something else, and that's what gives that pattern. And then we can also be fooled when people are related to each other, because then that throws things, because it could be a dominant trait, but if there's relatives that are related to each other, it could be recessive as well. Mm-hmm. And then your other question just about, I mean, we certainly have conditions that nobody's described before. And we see it in prenatal, but we see it more in pediatrics, where a child comes to us with a unique set of symptoms, and that's not been described. And so that's a cool part of a pediatric genetics counselor or doctor's job, is they might actually identify a new syndrome. So I haven't personally been part of that, but my colleagues actually have. And we know physicians who have discovered new conditions mm-hmm. and have had them named after them.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's pretty cool. I also wanted to know, when I learned genetics the first time, and as you just said a second ago, it happens. You have to look for it when you're looking for maybe recessive traits, and you see if unaffected parents and affected children, and you're looking for maybe close relation. Yeah. For new beginnings, new students to a class of genetics are like, well, does that really happen? Did people find out that they actually had children? Can you speak to that at all? How often do people find out either whether they knew or didn't know that they did have children with somebody of a close relation? What's that like?
So I would say that what we call consanguinity, when people are related to each other, often, in my experience, is not an unknown thing. I mean, there are certain cultures in other countries where it's actually preferred that people marry within the family. And so it's actually a known thing up front that they have to marry within their family to keep funding or money or status in the family. I have had one instance when I was talking to a patient on the phone and drawing her pedigree that she did not know she had married either a first or her husband was her first or second cousin, and that she found out when they were invited to the same family wedding.
Oh my God.
So I think it doesn't happen. At least for me, it hasn't happened that often where people don't know they're related to each other. Oftentimes they're coming to us because they already know that somehow, and they're worried about the risks from that.
Sure. Because we learn about it in textbooks, but I'm like, what context does that really happen in?
Or I guess not even relatedness, but coming from the same community. So,
Sure.
For example, just people of Ashkenazi Jewish descent, and I don't say, hopefully it's not disrespectful to anyone from that community, but I think there are a lot of communities, whether they're religious or cultural, that tend to marry from that community.
Sure.
And it's just, I think they call it a founder effect. Somebody, an ancestor from that culture, happened to carry a bad recessive or serious recessive gene like Tay-Sachs disease. And he happened to have a lot of children, and those children happened to marry each other, and then that condition really increased in incidence. And so that's been known to happen in certain pockets of populations, even if they're not related to each other, if they're a close community. So it's fortunate or unfortunate. And the Jewish population in general, I feel like they are aware of those increased risks. So many people are screened to see if they carry some of these genes even before they get married.
I see. Well, let's close out here. I'm curious. Let's maybe think broad perspective again, and a broad perspective. What do you think other people think about genetics and genetic counseling? What do you think the general viewpoint is, and do you think that's good or bad, and should we try to change that or influence it in a certain way, or is it fine on its own?
So I'm very interested in what the public opinion is of genetic counseling, and I feel like we here in the Bay Area are in a very specific bubble where we're very fortunate. We're in a very liberal area where genetic testing is available, pregnancy termination is available, and so I feel like the opinion of genetic counselors here in this area is fairly favorable, that people definitely, if they have met with a genetic counselor, have definitely found it helpful and useful. I actually don't think in general nationwide, I still think it's a fairly small profession, and my sense is that, I mean, we're doing more to promote the profession, but I think there's still a lot of people who don't know what genetic counselors do and where they fit into things. A lot of patients even here, especially if they come from other countries, will hear the counseling part of genetic and think it's a therapy session. So there's still a lot of misconceptions about what the term means. I don't think it's viewed negatively. I think it's still not very well known like other allied health professions like nurses or social workers or dentists. So it's encouraging that there are more and more of us, and with the media being more available on the internet, hopefully we'll be promoting our profession better and just spreading the word of the benefits of genetic counseling.
Great. If there's somebody watching right now who's really interested and wants to learn more about being a genetic counselor, do you have any particular good resource you would tell them to go visit, or do you have any special message you would tell them about genetic counseling?
So yeah, I would highly recommend the profession if anyone's thinking about genetic counseling. It's a very good combination of medicine and healthcare and interacting with patients. So we call that a clinical kind of job. If you like patients, and if you like the specific field of genetics, because that's pretty much what we're talking about. So if you don't like genetics, I wouldn't recommend this profession. But if you want to work with people but still be in tune with the science, it's a really good profession. And we do have a national society, so there's a website, nsgc.org, that has all the information about the training programs, the background requirements. We've done professional status surveys that talk about salary, job satisfaction. Genetic counselors tend to be more on the side of female. I think it's actually up to 95% are female.
Wow. I did not know that.
So the male genetic counselors are very well known in the field because there aren't that many of them, especially here in California. So because of that, there's good and bad for that. There are a lot of counselors who work part-time, and we don't take call like physicians or nurses. And so for those, again, who want to go into medicine but don't want the extra stress of those kinds of things, it's a really nice profession. Lots of counselors work part-time, again, because we're seeing patients and they can be scheduled appointments. The salaries, I think, especially with our certification and licensure, hopefully are starting to increase, and there's certainly a lot of job opportunity. So I would highly recommend checking out the website and talking to a genetic counselor if you can, even shadowing a counselor, and doing some volunteer work in healthcare just to make sure that's the area that they like to be in.